Independence Hall, the birthplace of America. The walls of this unassuming building have witnessed some of the most pivotal moments in history. Inside its chambers, the Declaration of Independence was debated and signed. The Constitution was crafted, and a young nation took its first steps toward freedom. But what secrets do these historic walls hold? Who were the people behind these monumental events? And how did this building become a symbol of liberty around the world? Join us as VoyageVault uncovers the incredible story of Independence Hall, the place where a nation was born. The humble beginnings of a historic hall. Before it became the birthplace of the United States, Independence Hall began as a colonial government building with far more modest ambitions. In 1732, in the bustling city of Philadelphia, the colonial government of Pennsylvania decided it needed a larger and more impressive meeting place for its legislature. At the time, Philadelphia was the largest city in the American colonies, a thriving hub of commerce and culture, and the government wanted a state house that reflected its growing importance. The man behind the design was Andrew Hamilton, not Alexander Hamilton, but a prominent lawyer and politician known as the Philadelphia Lawyer. Hamilton envisioned a building that combined practicality with grandeur. The design featured Georgian architecture, with its symmetrical facade, tall windows, and a central clock tower that would dominate the city skyline. Construction, however, was anything but smooth. The project faced constant delays, funding shortfalls, and debates about its design. It took over 20 years to complete, and by the time the State House was finished in 1753, it had already become a source of pride for Philadelphians. At first glance, no one could have predicted the monumental role this building would play in history. It was intended as a place for Pennsylvania's colonial government to meet and conduct business. But as tensions between the American colonies and Great Britain began to rise in the mid-18th century, the Pennsylvania State House would become a gathering place for revolutionaries, visionaries, and dreamers. This humble building was about to step onto the world stage, but its transformation began in a room that would go on to change history: the Assembly Room. The Assembly Room, the birthplace of freedom. The Assembly Room in Independence Hall may not look like much at first glance. It's a simple space with green-painted walls, wooden desks, and a high ceiling. But this room has witnessed some of the most extraordinary moments in history. In May 1775, the Second Continental Congress convened here. Delegates from the 13 colonies gathered to discuss their response to British rule. The colonies were already at war after the battles of Lexington and Concord, but declaring independence was far from a unanimous decision. Some delegates, like John Dickinson, argued for reconciliation with Britain, while others, including John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, believed that independence was the only path forward. The debates were heated, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The delegates knew that declaring independence meant risking everything: their property, their families, and their lives. If they failed, they would be branded as traitors and likely face execution. On July 2nd, 1776, after weeks of debate, the Continental Congress voted in favor of independence. 2 days later, on July 4th, the delegates ratified the Declaration of Independence, a document that would forever alter the course of history. Imagine the scene: Jefferson, quill in hand, carefully writing the words that would ignite a revolution. Franklin and Adams reviewing the draft, debating every phrase. The room was filled with the murmur of voices, the creak of wooden chairs, and the weight of the moment. Outside, church bells rang out as the Declaration was approved, and the colonies took their first steps toward freedom. The Assembly Room's story didn't end there. 11 years later, in 1787, this same room hosted the Constitutional Convention, where delegates gathered to draft the framework of the United States government. The debates were just as intense, with figures like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton shaping the future of the nation. From the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution, the Assembly Room wasn't just a meeting place. It was the birthplace of freedom. But the road to independence wasn't easy, and the hall itself would face its own challenges during the Revolutionary War. The Revolution and the hall's enduring role. Independence Hall's role in the American Revolution wasn't limited to signing documents. It became a symbol of the struggle for liberty and a witness to the darkest and most triumphant moments of the war. After the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1786, the colonies plunged into war with Great Britain. Philadelphia, as the largest city and one of the most important ports, became a key target for the British. In 1777, the city fell to British forces and the Continental Congress was forced to flee. Independence Hall, then still known as the Pennsylvania State House, was left abandoned. For 9 months, British soldiers occupied Philadelphia. The hall sat in silence, its assembly room empty of the voices that had once filled it. But even in its abandonment, the hall remained a powerful symbol of resistance. It represented the ideals of the Revolution, even as the war raged on. When the British left Philadelphia in 1778, the Continental Congress returned, and the hall resumed its role as the center of revolutionary activity. It hosted celebrations, military strategy meetings, and public gatherings. In 1781, after the victory at Yorktown, General George Washington himself was celebrated here, marking the beginning of the end of the war. Independence Hall had survived the war, but what would happen to it once peace was achieved? Its legacy as a symbol of liberty was only beginning. A symbol of liberty for the ages. By the early 19th century, Independence Hall was no longer the center of government activity. The state capital had moved to Harrisburg, and the hall was used for a variety of purposes, including as a courthouse. But the building's legacy as the birthplace of the nation ensured that it would never be forgotten. In 1824, the hall hosted a visit from the Marquis de Lafayette, the French hero of the American Revolution. Lafayette called it the Sanctuary of Freedom, and his visit helped solidify its reputation as a place of historical importance. Over the years, Independence Hall became a gathering place for those fighting for liberty and equality. Abolitionists held rallies here, calling for the end of slavery. Women's suffrage advocates pointed to the Declaration of Independence as a foundation for their own struggle for equality. And during World War II, the hall became a rallying point for those defending democracy against tyranny. Perhaps most famously, Independence Hall is home to the Liberty Bell. Originally cast to summon lawmakers to meetings, the bell's inscription, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof," has taken on a life of its own. Today, the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall stand side by side as global symbols of freedom and justice. Independence Hall. Today, Independence Hall is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the most visited landmarks in the world. Its preservation has been a painstaking process, with every detail carefully restored to reflect its appearance in the late 18th century. When you walk through its doors, you're stepping into history. The assembly room looks just as it did during the Second Continental Congress, with its green walls, wooden desks, and high windows. Visitors can stand in the very spot where the Founding Fathers debated, argued, and ultimately changed the course of history. But Independence Hall isn't just a place frozen in time, it's a living symbol. It reminds us of the courage and vision it took to build a nation, and it challenges us to carry those ideals forward into the future. Whether you visit its hallowed halls, gaze at its iconic clock tower, or reflect on its legacy, Independence Hall remains a testament to the enduring power of liberty. And that's the story of Independence Hall, a building that began as a simple state house and became the cradle of a revolution. What's your favorite story about Independence Hall? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our deep dive into the Golden Gate Bridge, another incredible symbol of resilience and innovation. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to VoyageVault for more stories about the landmarks that shaped our world.